Many people think about love as an object or a thing that you can get. And in fact, there was a movie a while back called The Object of My Affection. As if someone were a loving object, you would love them. Well, this is not very helpful for improving interpersonal communication practices. If I think about love as an object that I can get, I invest my time in making myself more desirable and in finding the right, quote-unquote, right person. And if you find the right person, some people think that love will be easy with that right person. That's not a very effective or useful way to think about love. So in interpersonal communication practices, it's better to think of love as a practice and not as a feeling. If I think of love as a practice and not as a feeling, I don't sort of wait around to find the right object of my affection, and I don't try and make myself more desirable object of someone else's affection. I invest in ways of practicing the art of loving. And there's a very famous book by a psychologist named Erich Fromm called The Art of Loving, from which some of these interpersonal suggestions derive. To be a loving person, in other words, or to engage in loving interpersonal communication practices requires that we let go of our narcissistic tendency to experience and interpret the world in terms of our own needs and wants. And it asks that we replace that subjective view that allows people to see things, that forces us to see things only in our own terms, and it allows us to start to see things in other people's terms. When we're able to see things in other people's terms, we're able to practice communication slightly differently. So to be a loving person is to engage in interpersonal communication that does three things, essentially. First, we want to accept that my perceptions, or our perceptions, opinions, and perspectives are always limited. In other words, we have a constrained view of our own opinions. This is necessary for containing our own narcissistic tendencies and allowing the other person to be on their own terms. Keeping that in mind should help you recognize how to engage in kinds of communicative acts that will allow for silence, that will allow for your partner to articulate their position as fully as possible, and that will limit how much you impose your own vision of the world on your partner. So first, accept that your perceptions, opinions, and perspectives are always limited. Second, practice empathic communication. We can do this by trying to understand others before we ask to be understood ourselves. We can do this by listening to learn about the other person in a non-judgmental manner, and by summarizing our own understanding of another person's perspective. So that's how you practice empathic communication. Third, engage the other's positive physiological affective states by making them feel excited, happy, appreciated, understood, affirmed, interested, proud, and amused. What I did there was list the most positive emotions, and they're the most positive emotions that are commonly associated with love. And what we learned in a previous video about positive physiological affective states can tell us that if we're manifesting those positive emotions, we are engaged in the practice of producing love. So those emotions, again, they're excited, happy, appreciated, understood, affirmed, interested, proud, and amused. So if we're engaging in communicative practices that elicit or produce those emotions in our partner, we're going to be acting in a loving way. So have a kind of limited sense of your own perspective, engage in empathetic communication, and produce those positive physiological affective states in your partners, and you will be loving instead of trying to find the right object of love.